Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Let me introduce myself. My name is Rafifah Alya and my student ID number is 332400014. And today I want to present my midterm exam project for intermediate grammar subject. So, what is compound complex sentence? A compound complex sentence is a sentence containing one or more dependent clauses and two or more independent clauses joined by a conjunction or a semicolon. An independent clause comprises a subject and verb and is a complete thought. A dependent clause is an incomplete thought that would not be a full sentence on its own. It's also referred to as a subordinate clause. And here's a few examples. The sentence that I've made for the first one is I wore wet clothes because yesterday the clothesline got wet from the rain and there is nothing I could do but stay still until the class is over. And then the second one, even though he failed the math test, he still got a perfect score on the English test, and that's why his parents were proud of him. And then the third one, if only Jerry confessed his feelings sooner, Anna would have accepted his confession, and maybe he wouldn't be thinking about it in his room right now. And then the last one is when Sarah brought the news, everyone was very surprised. They didn't expect she was pregnant after all this time. And there's the explanation for the few examples that I've read before. The first one is notice that the first sentence is an independent clause and the subordinating conjunction because hinted as a dependent clause. And the coordinating conjunction and tells us that there are two independent clauses. Then the second one, like we notice that the subordinating conjunction even though tells us that even though he failed the math test is a dependent clause. And the coordinating conjunction and tells us that there's two independent clauses. And then the third one, so we might notice that the subordinating conjunction if tells us that if only Jerry confessed his feelings is a dependent clause, and the coordinating conjunction and tells us that there is two independent clauses. And then the last one, notice that the subordinating conjunction when tells us that when Sarah brought the news is a dependent clause, and the rest of the sentence tells us that there's two independent clauses. Okay, let's move on to the next section. Why compound complex sentences are often used in academic writing. So basically, compound complex sentences are frequently used in academic writing because they help to convey precise, logically connected, and nuanced ideas to put it simply, it's something that academic communication requires. Linguistic data from corpus studies, particularly university-level writing corpora, such as the Michigan Corpus of Upper-Level Student Papers (MICUSP) and the British Academic Written English Corpus (BIWE), shows that advanced writers use longer and syntactically more elaborate sentences to express dense information more clearly. Like high information density, academic tests often presents multiple related ideas at once. Compound complex sentences allow a writer to include a main claim, supporting evidence, and a qualifying condition or explanation within a single grammatical unit. And then, logical and hierarchical relationship. Academic arguments rely heavily on logical reasoning. Compound complex sentences use subordination and coordination to show cause and effect, for example, because, therefore, since, contrast, for example, although, however, condition, for example, if, unless, and temporal relationship, example, when, while. And according to syntactic analysis in academic corpora, subordination markers such as although, while, since, because occur more frequently in academic writing than in everyday conversation. This indicates that academic writers actively structure relationship between ideas. And then precision and qualification. Academic writing often avoids absolute claims. Common complex sentence allow writer to hedge or qualify statement, which reflect careful reasoning. And then there's cohesion and flow. Using compound complex sentences help maintain smooth connection between ideas. Instead of short, choppy sentences, they allow information to progress in a natural and cohesive flow. Corpus-based stylistic research shows that expert academic writers balance sentence length and complexity to create readability while maintaining depth. And then the last one is indicator of advanced proficiency. Linguistically, the use of compound complex structure correlates with advanced language proficiency research in applied linguistics. Byberg 2011 demonstrates that as writers develop skill, they increase syntactic complexity, variety of clause types, and frequency of subordination. Thus, their writing becomes more structurally layered and rhetorically effective. And then we move on to the rule of parallelism. Let's start with the definition. So, what's the definition of parallelism? The word of parallel is an adjective that refers to the quality of something being placed side by side, and parallelism refers to the state of something being parallel or in relation to another entity. So, in English grammar, the term parallelism refers to the use of words, phrases, clauses, and other grammatical components to indicate similar ideas in a particular sentence. It makes the sentence clear, balanced, and meaningful. And according to Quirk et al. 1985, parallelism ensures balance and rhythm in writing by maintaining uniformity of structure among related words or phrases. In simpler terms, words, phrases, or clauses that are similar in meaning or importance should also be similar in form. Second, the rule. The primary idea that we will have to keep in mind when using similar words, phrases, and clauses in sentence is that it should be balanced throughout the sentence, such a balanced arrangement it can be achieved by repeating the same syntactic forms and structure. So, in order to write such sentences, there are a few rules we should follow. Rule number 1, when providing a list of items within a sentence, mention all of them in the same syntactic form. Rule number 2, when listing out points, make sure they are in the same structure. Rule number 3, when mentioning a series of action in a sentence, see to it that all of them are written in the same verb forms. And then rule number 4, if two or more phrases or clauses mentioning similar or contrasting ideas are used in the same sentence, see to it that they have the same syntactic structure. A common rule when applying parallelism in sentences is the usage of commas to separate similar or contrasting words, phrases, and clauses. For example, parallelism in a list of series. The correct one is Missy likes cooking, singing, and dancing, while in the incorrect one, Missy likes to cook, singing, and dance. And the explanation is, in the correct version, all the elements cooking, singing, dancing are grounds, verb plus ing. In the incorrect version, to cook and dance breaks pattern by using an infinite form. According to Quirk et al. 1985, lists must maintain identical syntactic categories for each coordinated element. Parallel forms make sentences easier to parse and interpret. Parallel in paired ideas using both and either or. And the correct one is, you can either call me or send an email if you have question. And in the incorrect one, you can either call me or an email should be sent if you have question. So it should be each item in the series must use the same grammatical form. In the correct sentences, all words or phrases are nouns or infinitive phrases. Mixing infinitive grounds or clauses as in the incorrect examples break the patterns and confuses readers. According to Pinker 2015, notice that parallel structure allows the reader's mind to align grammatical patterns with semantic rules, which strengthen comprehension. And then parallelism in comparison using then or as. The correct one is, Ivan is taller than his sister, and in the incorrect one, Ivan is taller than the sister is short. When making comparison, both elements should have similar grammatical structures. Like for example, taller than his sister, noun praise versus noun praise, mixing verb, adjective, or phrases of different types confuse what is being compared. According to Swan 2005, correct comparison structure required the elements after then or as to correspond in form and grammatical function to maintain logical equality. And then the last one is parallelism with correlative conjunction, not only but also. And in the correct one, not only did she sing but she also danced. And in the incorrect one, not only she sang but also dancing. In the correct version, both parts are for praises, sing or also dance. In the incorrect version, the first part uses a full verb praise, did she sing, while the second part uses a gerund, dancing, causing a breakdown in parallel structure. According to Celsa Murcia and Larson Freeman, 1999, argued that correlative conjunction require formally parallel structure to maintain syntactic coherence. The gerund breaks this expected coherence. And then, why incorrect parallelism causes confusion? So the first one is break logical flow. Readers expect patterns. When structure shifts mid-sentence, it interrupts comprehension. For example, the teacher asked us to read the book and that we should write a report, which means the reader pauses to reconcile the read infinitive and that we should write clause. And then the second one creates ambiguity. Without consistent form, the relationship between ideas become unclear. For example, he likes reading more than to write, which means unclear if reading or writing is preferred due to mixed structures. And then the third one reduces emphasis and style. Parallelism adds rhythm and persuasive power. In other words, Martin Luther King is I have a dream. Repetition. Faulty structure weakens rhetorical impact. According to Quirk et al., 1985, describe parallelism as a syntactic strategy to reinforce semantic coherence. According to Crystal 2008, adds that parallel construction promote processing fluency, helping listener or readers grasp pattern quickly. Let's move on to the next section, and there is the illogical participle modifier. Let's start with the definition. What is the definition of illogical participle modifiers? An illogical participle modifiers, often called a dangling or misplaced participle, is a word or phrases that modifies a word not clearly stated in the sentence. So in other words, the modifier is left dangling because the word it is meant to describe is missing or unclear, leading to a confusing or illogical sentence. So typically participle modifiers occur at the beginning of the sentence, though they can also appear at the end. They are often participle phrases that start with a verb ending in ing or ed, but they can also be infinitive phrases or other types of modifiers. So how it causes grammatical error or ambiguity? So missing or implicit subject. The participle phrases assumes an actor the implied subject, but that actor isn't present or is different from the main clause subject. So reader can't link action to an agent. And then there's wrong attachment. The modifiers end up adjacent to the wrong noun. So the sentence literally says something absurd. In other words, walking down the street that trees were beautiful implies the trees were walking. Processing difficulty. Readers must pause and reevaluate who did what, comprehension slows, and the intended meaning can be lost. And then there's a few examples. The first one is the incorrect one. Walking into the lecture hall, the slides were already projected. And then there's the corrected one. Walking into the lecture hall, I saw that the slides were already projected. So, in the original, the participle phrase walking into the lecture hall has no clear subject. The slides cannot walk. The correction supplies an explicit subject I whose action matched the participle phrase, restoring logical attachment and removing the dangling modifier. And then the second example. The incorrect one is painted last summer. The new mural brightened the alley. And then the corrected one is the new mural painted last summer brightened the alley. Grammatically, the phrase painted last summer appears to modify the alley in the original word order, making the alley the thing painted, which is illogical. Moving the participle phrase next to the new mural, its intended referent, or parenthetically inserting it after the noun fixes the logical link. And then there's the third example, the incorrect one. Having finished the report, the boss said she would review it tomorrow. And then the corrected one, having finished the report, I was told by the boss that she would review it tomorrow. The participle phrase having finished the report was intended to refer to the writer I, but as placed it appears to modify the boss, implying the boss finished the report. By making the actual subject I explicit and placing it immediately after the participle phrase, the sentence now has a logical subject for the modifier. And then the last example, the incorrect one. Opening the package, a small box was found inside. The corrected version is, when I opened the package, I found a small box inside. In the original, the participle phrase, opening the package lacks an explicit agent. The grammatical subject of the main clause, a small box, cannot logically be its agent. Recasting the sentence with an explicit agent I resolves the illogical modifiers and removes ambiguity. And this is the corpus and study-based evidence on frequency of participle or modified errors by learners. Learner corpora shows that non-finite participle clauses are used differently by learners versus native writers, often underused by learners and sometimes misused. So this suggests both underuse and different distribution of participle clauses in learner writing. And then the second one, learner error corpora, Cambridge Learner Corpus, ICLE, ICNILE, CDU, draft, etc. shows that error involving non-finitive verbs or ing forms are common categories in error taxonomies. Error coding seems developed for corpora such as the Cambridge Learner Corpus make it possible to count and compare error types. Studies using this resource routinely find that problems with non-finitive form, including misuse of ing participle infinitive versus gerunds and misattachment, are a non-trivial portion of grammatical errors in learner writing. Studies that break down error types often list verbing misuse or non-finitive clause problems among frequent mistakes. For example, studies of learners' essay and writing development list misuse of non-finitive verbs, verb-ing misuse, infinitive misuse among common grammatical error categories, especially at lower proficiency level, and show a decline in such error with higher proficiency. These studies indicate that participle misuse, including the related or dangling modifiers, figures in the set of non-finitive or clauses errors that learners make. Note on participle modifiers, especially many error datasets tag broad categories, non-finitive, verb-ing misuse, clause and clause attachment errors rather than a single label, dangling participle. That means precise, comparable global statistic for just dangling participle are rare in public summaries. Researchers more often report underuse of participle clauses by learner and less non-finite or clauses attachment problem among top types of error. Also, gender matters in some scientific register. Dangling or implementive participle construction can be frequent and tolerated, complicating a simple error or not error count. Then we move on to case number 1, compound complex. We are going to analyze the sentences. The case 1 is, because the teacher was late, the student waited and they start the class by themselves. But however, another student claims that this sentence is not a true compound complex sentence because one clause may not be fully independent. There's an explanation for that. Let's break down the clauses first. The first one is dependent clauses. Because the teacher was late, introduced by the subordinating conjunction because, which means can stand alone as independent adverbial clause. And then the second one, independent clauses. First, the student waited. The students as the subject, waited as a verb, which means stands alone, is an independent clause. And then the second one, they started the class by themselves. They are the subject, started as a verb, and which means it stands alone and it's the independent clause. So does this sentence qualify as a common complex sentence? Well, by standard definition used in modern grammars, a common complex sentence contains at least 2 independent coordinate clauses and at least 1 dependent subordinate clause. So this sentence before has exactly that structure. 1 subordinate clause because the teacher was late, plus 2 independent clauses. The student waited, they started class by themselves. Therefore, yes, it is a grammatical compound complex sentence. This is the criterion stated in reference grammar. The Cambridge Grammar of the English Language by Huddleston and Pullum, CamG 2002, treats clause types, subordination versus coordination, and notes that the classification of sentence types is based on the presence of coordinated clauses and subordinate clauses. In other words, the syntactic fact, infinitive clauses that can stand alone count as independent clauses. The Cambridge Grammar emphasizes structural criteria rather than prescriptive label. A Comprehensive Grammar of the English Language by Kurt Greenbaum, Leach, and Starvik, 1985, gives this textbook or traditional taxonomy simple compound complex, defining compound complex as 2 or more coordinate independent clauses plus 1 or more subordinate clauses. It also discussed the punctuation and attachment issues that make long clause chains potentially ambiguous even when grammatically well formed. And then there's the support from 2 journal studies. The first one is Lude describes automatic measured clause per sentence, dependent clauses per clause, etc., and provides baseline values for different corpora or genres. Clauses per sentence and related indices are the standard way corpus researchers quantify how often multi-clause sentences appear. Use of this measure shows how frequently sentences have multiple clauses, so compound complex sentences are captured in this distribution. And then the second one, this paper used clause-based measure, in other words, clauses per sentence, to investigate relationship between syntactic complexity and writing quality in undergrad L2 academic papers. It shows how clause counts and therefore multi-clause sentences vary by proficiency or quality, directly relevant evidence about how often writers produce multiple clause structures. And there's the clause tree breakdowns, as you can see. Yep. And then this is the corpus data. How often do compound complex or multi-clause sentences appear in formal writing? In Biber and Gray 2016, Grammatical Complexity in Academic English, in their large corpus of academic writing, Biber and Gray argue that academic English is structurally compressed rather than elaborated. They show that compared to spoken register, finite dependent clause, in other words, subordinate clauses are less frequent per clause in academic writing. In other words, multi-clause sentences do appear, but much of the complexity in academic prose comes from phrasal compression rather than many subordinate or coordinate clauses. And then the second one is Keto 2023. Clausal and phrasal coordination in recent American English. In a recent corpus study, Keto reports on clausal coordination, in other words, coordinate clauses, in modern American English, while not limited to academic writing. Her data shows that coordination at the clause level remains a robust strategy in written English. The presence of frequent clausal coordinate clauses means that many sentences will have two or more clauses. This support the ideas that compound structure and potentially compound complex are non-negligible in formal written register. And then we move on to case 2, dangling construction. And then there's the sentence that we are going to analyze. Walking through the park, flowers look beautiful. A grammar reviewer marks this as incorrect because the participle phrase creates a dangling modifier. And then there are the explanation for that. This sentence is incorrect because the opening participle phrase walking through the park is meant to modify the doer of the action. The person was walking. However, the grammatical subject of the main clause is the flower. This creates a dangling modifier, a modifier with no logical subject to attach to. And the logic mismatch. Who was walking through the park? A person, not the flowers, but the sentence attached walking through the park to the flowers, implying the flowers were walking. Thus, the modifier dangles, causing ambiguity and illogical meaning, and so the participle phrase should modify the person who walked through the park, such as I, we, the visitor. Since the subject is missing, the grammar reviewer correctly marks the sentence as incorrect. And then there's the corrected version with explanation. Correction number 1, inserting the logical subject. Walking through the park, I saw that the flower looked beautiful. Why this fixes the error? The participle phrase walking through the park now logically modifies I, the person who does something. Correction 2. Rewrite the clause. As I walked through the park, the flowers looked beautiful. Why this works? The subordinating conjunction as creates a clear non-dangling adverbial clause with a proper subject. And then there's the before and after comparison. As you can see, it's changed the incorrect one with the correct one and more logical. And then there's the support from grammar resources. In a comprehensive grammar of the English language, the authors state that non-infinitive clauses must have a logical subject that can be inferred from the metric clause. If this subject is missing or mismatched, a dangling or misrelated modifier occurs. Other in understanding and using English grammar explain, a participle phrase must clearly and logically refers to the noun that follows it. Otherwise, the sentence contains a dangling modifiers. But authoritative grammar texts agree that modifiers must attach to the correct logical subject. And then there's the journal references. According to Kim J. 2019, errors in English participle construction among L2 university writers, Journal of Second Language Writing, finds that dangling participle are among the top 5 structural error in intermediate advanced writing, shows that over 22% of non-infinitive clause error involve unclear subject. And then according to Said and Mutar 2020, Synthetic Problems of Dangling Modifiers in EFL as a Writing Arab Word. English Journal reports that learners often attach participle modifiers to the nearest noun, resulting in illogical meaning analysis of 200 student essays revealed 78 instances of dangling modifiers. Both studies include that incorrect attachment of participle phrases is a persistent difficulty for language learners. And then the case number 3, compound sentences. There's two sentences that we are going to analyze. The sentence A is the manager approves the proposal but the director rejected it. And then the sentence B, the manager approved the proposal because the director was busy. A student argues that both sentences are compound, but another disagrees, saying the sentence B is not. There's the explanation for this. Clause by clause analysis. The sentence A, clause 1, independent clause 1, the manager approved the proposal. Independent clause, subject plus finite verb can stand alone, coordinator, but a coordinating conjunction connecting two independent clauses. Clause 2, the director rejected it, which means it's independent clause, subject plus finite verb can stand alone. Conclusion, sentence A is a compound sentence. And then we move on to sentence B. Clause 1, the manager approved the proposal, which means it's a independent clause. Subordinator plus clause DC because the director was busy. Subordinating conjunction because introduce a dependent adverbial clause that cannot stand alone. Conclusion, sentence B is not a compound sentence but a complex sentence. So there's the grammatical explanation, compound versus complex. Compound sentence, at least two independent clauses joined by a coordinating conjunction and but or nor for so yet or by a semicolon. Each clause is syntactically complete. Example pattern, independent clause plus add or but plus independent clause. Complex sentence, one independent clause plus one or more dependent clauses introduced by subordinating conjunction because although if when since etc the dependent clause can stand alone. And then there's compound sentence examples with different conjunction. The first one, Lucas celebrated his birthday with great joy and everyone wished him a happy birthday. 2, she wanted to attend the party but she didn't have a dress to wear. 3, Dewey really wanted to buy a new motorbike, so he started working part-time to earn some extra money. 4, Gela is a very polite person, yet she is very humble. And then we move on to linguistic or corpus evidence, the theoretical support. According to Quirk, R. Greenbaum, S. Leach, G. and Starvik, J. 1985, a comprehensive grammar of the English language through thorough treatment of clauses, types, coordination versus subordination, and how conjunction patterns with clause types. Quirk et al. Defined compound sentence as coordination of clauses and complex sentence as subordination, one main clause plus subordinate clauses. According to Huddleston R. and Pullum G.K. 2002, the Cambridge Grammar of the English Language detailed formal description of clause status, main versus subordinate, coordination and conjunction classes. Explain why. Because is a subordinator introduce a dependent clause while but and so yet are coordinators. Cario Passer ML 2018, a contrastive study of the Cario Passer ML 2013 shows the importance of distinguish subordinating versus coordinating connective in academic prose. And then Bluhdorn Hayes 2008 a synthetic or semantic or discourse course account of connective showing the functional difference between coordination and subordinate, useful for understanding why because introduced as dependence while but as coordinates. And then there is the synthetic evidence or clauses trees. There's two types of clauses. There's the first one is sentence A as a compound sentence, and then the B as a complex sentence. As you can see, it's different because in the complex sentence, the last one is the adding a dependent clause because the director was Busey. And then there's the references, that I use for my analysis for the case 3. And that's all for my presentation. Thank you very much. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.